Hello, welcome to Two Doulas and a Midwife. We're back again with Sharon and Danielle. And very exciting day as it's Sharon's birthday, so we're having an extra special one today. We are going to be talking about positions today. Birthing positions can be so effective in laboring and birth, and I think it's a subject that everybody should have the knowledge about, that they've got the choice of whatever position they want to, they can birth in. Because, as moms, we kind of just go with whatever the doctor says. But we do have the choice to say, I'd actually like to be in a squatting position, or I'd like to birth lying on my back, or I'd like to birth on all fours. It's your choice, your body. You can choose how you want to birth. And so we're going to be discussing this subject. Danielle's going to start us off with a, a story or two of how effective changing your position in labor can help this. So please welcome Danielle. And we're going to get you started with Danielle, and we're going to get going. Let's change position. Danielle?
Thank you, Lisa. So I thought this. I mean, I love this topic, and it's something that some people don't often know. There's such a stigma. People watch movies and they see the dramatic waters breaking in the supermarket, and 5 minutes later, the woman is thrashing around, screaming in agony, and her partner rushes her to the hospital, and she gets put in a hospital bed, and she's lying on her back, and she's screaming and sweating and screaming this baby out, and then she has a baby. And I think so many times that's what people think that birth is. Our waters break, or we go to the hospital, we lie on our backs and we push out our baby. And it really, more often than not, doesn't happen like that. And so I've had very different labors and births with my kids. And my oldest son, he decided to break his waters, but he didn't feel like he wanted to come. And so I was induced, and which was very in the labor was very intense, and I was exhausted. By the time I was ready to push him out, I was so tired, and I was lying on my back, and my lovely midwife was really trying to get me in a more upright position, and I just couldn't anymore. And she propped my leg up in her hip, and I pushed for ages and ages and ages, and I burst blood vessels in my face and in my neck because I was pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing. And then finally, baby's head came out, then baby's body came out, and I was left with quite a nasty tear. And it wasn't terrible, but I was lying there having to be stitched up for quite a while afterwards. And um, and what I didn't realize was how much the position that I was lying in while I was pushing my baby out could have such an effect on what happened to my body afterwards, and also on the efficiency of getting my baby out. Now, for my other three births, it was a completely different situation. I bounced on the birthing ball. I even jumped on my kid's trampoline. And I was walking around, and I was shifting from the bed to the birthing ball to walking around the room to sitting on the couch. And I never stayed put in one place. I wasn't lying on the bed. And I couldn't believe at some points when the midwife actually said to me, "Oh, you're 8 centimeters, let's run the bath." And I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that such a short amount of time had passed and I was already doing so well in my labor. And I got into the bath, the big, beautiful baths in the old Genesis. And I was able to get into a lovely squatting position in the bath. And sometimes in two pushes, that's what happened with my third son. In two pushes, he was out. And with my daughter as well, she just came out, and I always describe it as like a little astronaut floating in space. And my second son as well, just a few pushes, and they were out. And those magic words that the midwife said to me afterwards, "Oh, look at that, you don't need any stitches." And I was able to
Wonderful.
get out the bath, get on the bed with my baby, breastfeed perfectly. And my poor little my firstborn really didn't have the easiest time afterwards. He had swallowed so much amniotic fluid. He had to have his tummy pumped. He even
Oh,
spent the first night of his life in ICU. And as a result, I didn't get to breastfeed him until he was about 12 hours old. And after, doing all this research, is, realizing what an effect my birthing positions had on each of my children, especially that first hour after birth. And Sharon's going to chat to us a little bit more about how much your positioning, whether it's during your labor or during that time where you're pushing your baby out, how that can actually affect how easy your birth can be, how long that pushing phase can take, and the after effects of what happens to your body and how well baby copes with those different positions. So, Sharon, you can take it away.
Well, thank you so much, Danielle, for that wonderful story. The fact is that as human beings, in every single culture in the world, there is no culture that lies down flat on their backs in order to expedite or expel anything from their bodies. If you are having a poo, let's get graphic, you don't lie on your back to get anything out of your body. If you had a tampon that was stuck, you certainly wouldn't lie on your back in order to get it out of your body. You would be upright and you'd be moving about. And here is the pelvis. Here we are, the pelvis. And if you imagine that you've got legs attached here, in order to get anything down and out of this body, you want to gyrate, you want to move it about, you want to swing it about in labor, and you want to see yourself imagining getting this child down. You have a uterus. You have a uterus like this, and there is a cervix at the end of your uterus, and there is a birth canal. And this is your pump action powerhouse here, and your baby and your membranes are inside. You can hear them all rattling around. And Agnes likes to demonstrate. Here is Agnes. She likes to demonstrate how this all works. But the fascinating thing about the pelvis is, first of all, at 35, 36 weeks, it's going to loosen. And so its job when you are not pregnant is to stay tightly held together so that it will keep you upright and able to walk around. But if you remember, when you got to 36 weeks and you were ready for your baby to engage, your pelvis started to feel like a bag of bones. It started to feel like it was all loosening and it was coming adrift. And when you got up in the morning, it felt like you're having to pull bits in and pull on your strings in order to stand up effectively and walk, because all your ligaments and all your cartilages, you've got a big cartilage here and your pubic bone here, you've got cartilages that attach themselves all over the pelvis, and you've got ligaments that hold it all together. And these ligaments turn to chewing gum at 36 weeks, so that these bones here are going to move sideways a centimeter in each direction for childbirth. And your sacrum, this bit here, is going to lift 2 centimeters up in the air, and it bulges out like that. And your coccyx is going to come out like that in your labor, and it's going to come out at a 90-degree angle like that, in order that your baby can come down out of your body like that. Now, unfortunately, women today don't tend to talk to their grandmothers about childbirth. They assume that their grandmothers never had a baby. But of course, most of them did. And most of them did it without any medical intervention. And that generation of women were brought up to believe they're women. You know, not much was thought about women. They were not held in much esteem. And you know, childbirth was women's work. It was, so what kind of work. And they were brought up to believe, well, you're just a woman and you're going to get pregnant and you're going to have a baby, and there we are. And so they were able to birth breeches and twins and big babies and all sorts of children at home most of the time. You know, if you consider from your grandmother back to Adam and Eve, women have given birth in their own environment at home. And listening to your first story there, Danielle, if you can imagine that your first one, you were so totally gormless that you hadn't any experience to take with you, and your approach to labor was one of dismay, in that I don't know what I'm doing, and I just need to be told and to be led and to do what anybody tells me to do. And you weren't confident enough. I mean, who's confident with their first baby? But you weren't confident enough to go into your own feelings in your body and in your mind. And that's why journaling in your pregnancy is such a good idea. To interview yourself about, how do I see myself doing this? What makes sense to me? How am I going to feel when something like the universe needs to leave my body? And how do I see myself doing that? And so if we can imagine putting a woman on her back, this is the dorsal position. How on earth can you get anything out of this? We, in a dorsal position like this, we require that a woman is going to push this child uphill. Here is the curvature of your body. Here, you're pushing this child uphill like this, against gravity, against the curve of your body, and against the muscular constriction of your vagina. But if you are upright like this, or on your hands and knees like that, then your baby is coming out of your body like that. What a brilliant design. This is opening, this is coming back, and babies are moving down with the curvature of your body, and your powerhouse up here is pushing great power through here and down there. That is the design of it. And your grandmothers would have been at home, so the atmosphere was more comfortable. They didn't fear anybody walking in at any time in a public room, opening the door when they are exposed with their knickers off, in order sometimes just to ask for a towel, or have you, as the midwife, had your tea? It's tea time. Have you been? That kind of stuff. Um, that we know so much scientifically. We know that every time we disturb a woman in her labor, we can add on an hour to her labor, because up goes her adrenaline, down comes her endorphins and her oxytocin, and she pauses. Everything just stops. And if we could encourage women when they are pregnant to, first of all, talk to themselves, talk to their grandmothers, then talk to their mothers. Their mothers was the first generation to have to go into hospital, where hospital was expected. And, the propaganda around it was that this is a clean place. We now have sterility. You don't have to give birth in those disgustingly dirty homes of yours. When a midwife would come to the home, we would scrub everything, the tables, the floors, the furniture, clean the sheets. Everything was scrubbed and immaculate and beautiful. And so you're far less likely, if we think about that microbiome, Lisa, you're far less likely to have any kind of infection or get sick from your own environment and your own bugs that you live with. And to go into a hospital where diseases are brought and diseases grow, and of course, there's bugs everywhere. It's not an ideal place to bring a vulnerable person into the world. And so, first of all, a woman needs to get in touch with her mind and her emotion and her feeling and her power. And so many women today are afraid of their power and of feeling exposed from a power stance, that we encourage the partner, the dad, to be in at the birth. But unless we're going to prepare him for her power, there are so many men who can feel disempowered by her power, and they don't like to see it. And it can cause harm to a relationship if he is not prepared for seeing the glory, if you like, of a woman at her most powerful, bringing forth life into the world. So all of that needs to be discussed as well. If we are going to empower him with his role and what he can do to help and how they're working together, and what a miracle this is that they get to participate in. So if we are preparing them in their pregnancy to understand that their body needs to be upright, to get the powerhouse, the force of the uterus to work down, to push a baby down against the cervix so that the cervix can then open. That if she's moving her pelvis and she's rocking and she's dancing her way through her labor, why would she not want to do that? Think about the music that you're playing, thinking about the oxytocin is coming from his love. So have a good snog and get together and, be feely touchy and go and get in the shower or whatever you have to do in order to keep that oxytocin level up. And the fact is that hospitals are such a sterile emotional place as well. It's not just that they push the agenda of clean and white and stainless steel and but that it's sterile from an emotional point of view. We don't like to think that sex was involved here, and so we don't like to think that people can get together and hold hands and go and do the hokey cokey and stuff. Not that I would promote that in labor, because most women are not in the mood at that time. But certainly she can be doing other things like being embraced, being loved, being cuddled, being touched, being stroked. All of those things are going to lift her oxytocin and therefore enable her to produce endorphins. And women are, again, afraid of pain, but the lying on your back is the most dysfunctional position that we could ever come up with. Who came up with that? It is not a natural position for a woman to get into. I call it the stranded beetle position because she's all like a cockroach and legs and arms, and people are towering over her. And of course it was thought of because, first of all, she will feel the control of those people around her. She's far more likely to be complicit with other people's instruction if they are literally towering over her and looking down on her. When we take a woman's clothes away in labor and we give her a hospital gown and her bum is sticking out the back, she's first of all afraid to walk down the passage to go to the loo, where the loo normally is, because she is exposed. So we again make her conform to our rules and regulations because she's not even wearing her own clothes. So she's vulnerable and she's exposed, and she's not encouraged to be emotional, and she's not encouraged to even hold hands with her partner. So she's not producing oxytocin effectively. Therefore, she's not producing endorphins effectively. Therefore, she's far more likely to have drugs given to her to be induced or to be augmented, to have pain relief, which means that if we take her awareness away of the process that is happening in her body, then we can't expect it to work. If she can't feel that baby moving down and she can't feel the baby rotating and she doesn't have that awareness that her baby is coming, then she's going to stay on her back when the baby needs to be expelled out of her body. And of course, that
And
takes
with
much longer.
gravity help.
Yeah, exactly. So if you're going to squat, and Daniel, again, you were talking about that, here are your hip bones, and this is your femurs stuck in here like this. And if your legs are hanging down like this, and you squat like that, then you're going to open this part of your pelvis, this bit here, by an extra 28%, just by pulling it open like that if you are squatting. And so if you've got a baby who's hanging onto their ear or has a fist under their chin and they're pushing themselves sideways, and you're able to open that pelvis by an extra 28%, and you're already in an open position because you're upright and your body's working effectively the way it was designed, then you're far more likely to be effective and to have a simple birth. It just, you just have to think of shapes. You've got the shape of the head, you've got the shape of the cervix, you've got the power of the contractions pushing everything down towards the exit. And it's just not sensible for a woman to lie on her back, stick her legs in the air. I mean, has anybody considered having a poo like that? Oh, yes, I get a milk on it. I'm going to lie on my back, stick my legs in the air. And what about these blooming leatherette poles with chains on? We have such
they're still alive and
perverse
well,
ideas.
Sharon. Even in the most what's considered the most private hospitals, those poles and stirrups are alive and well. And I have personally witnessed, like a capable mom, literally her, baby's crowning, gynae rocks up, like 5 minutes before the baby's head comes out, and the midwives literally had to pound on this young woman's abdomen because baby had was lovely 4.1 kilos, and um and he just wasn't coming out as fast as they would have liked. And she had 4 midwives pounding on her abdomen while the gynae was pulling this baby out of her. And all I stood there thinking was, would that have been necessary if we could have lifted a leg, if we could have raised her up, had her in a squatting position, or even put her on all fours where she could have pushed that baby out like that? That was, I couldn't understand why those extreme measures were necessary on a woman who's capably pushed out 2 babies before this one. But here, everyone was in panic stations.
And
And
like Sharon said, they're just looking down on her and taking away her power.
and that poor girl had she had to have a DNC after that birth. So she now has 2 small children, a newborn, and has to go back into hospital where she had to have a general anesthetic to have a dilation and curettage where they clean out the uterus because there were so many blood clots. And she was on a drip for ages afterwards. And she just her breastfeeding journey with this baby wasn't great, despite having done it perfectly successfully before with her other 2 children. And the whole beginning of this little baby's life was such a challenge when her body was actually doing what it was supposed to be doing. When the midwife said to her, "No, don't push, mommy, you're only 4 centimeters." And she said, "I feel like I need to push." And then when they checked her again, she was 9 centimeters, 10 minutes after being 4 centimeters. And it was just very, disheartening to see how the mother's physiological power was taken away, despite her body being so capable at doing what it was supposed to be doing. And
I think,
yet,
I think we forget about the knock-on effect, the consequences, like you say, afterwards of a difficult birth. It plays out in so many ways, and one of the biggest ones is breastfeeding. That's immediate skin to skin, isn't there, or whatever. And so I think it's something, as a pregnant mom, it's something you should really spend a lot of time researching and understanding of that the different positions that you can give birth in, because lying on your back is just not one of them. And I know, that even the WHO protocol is, they advise against lying on the back. But yes, I think it's been around
But
a hospital protocol for so long.
mm,
But
Sorry, Sharon?
I hate to be the one to come to the defense of the medical people. But sometimes, and just because you have birthed a baby twice before, very competently, doesn't mean, of course, that number 3 is going to be simple. Because if you look around you at number 3 children, I always tell my mums, are very interesting people. They either come before you are ready, and you nowhere near your due date, or they wait until they have your full attention. They are the performers. They are the people on the stage. They're the singers and the dancers and the joke tellers, and they are hysterical people. And
you
they
described
can't.
my 3rd son to a T, Sharon.
Yes, you see, that's the third child. And
Number
so a
3.
mother, you are a third child. So third children then, they are always a surprise in some kind of way. And I think that it does help to get women ready for whatever's coming. And although we can assure them and ensure that they certainly start off squatting. I see women in labor like a cormorant, it's a seabird. It brings its wings around and it creates a shadow and it goes fishing. And a woman like that, where she can protect herself and bring her cloak around her, or have her towel even around her, and she's completely private. If she was sitting on my very luxurious placenta bucket, then she can be completely private. She doesn't have to be exposed in any way at all, and she can make interesting noises, and she can grunt, and she can push naturally, and she can feel that propulsion of her body working. But if you've got a baby who is in trouble, and you have a baby who is disturbing the team, the caring team around that mother and child, and they do need to move faster, or perhaps the obstetrician was needing to use a kiwi, or was reaching for don't do forceps anymore, but as something to expedite that release of the baby being compressed in that pelvis and by the birth canal, then you can see why concern was in place to get that child out quicker. And particularly if that child was heading for the special care unit, then there was concern around the fetal heart and the condition of the baby. And so, yes, then you can see that in a case of an abnormal birth, then medical teams sometimes do need to overpower. But if we're talking about what happens naturally, then, and a natural labor and a healthy baby, then of course women should be encouraged, first of all, not to push like lunatics. This breath holding, all those broken blood vessels that you had, Danielle, was because of that breath holding and drive the child down. I like to see how a mum is going to push naturally first. If she's pushing, and the best way that we can hear a woman when she's pushing is she will be breathing beautifully. She's breathing like the waves on the beach. She's welcoming her breath when her contraction starts. She's standing on that beach and she's ready for the tide to come in. She's taking deep breaths of sea air. She's breathing for her baby. She's breathing in the oxygen and she's sharing it. She's sending it down through her body, and she is getting into the rhythm of that breathing. And at the peak of that contraction, when things are driving down, she will make that noise. And I will say to her, Molly, are you pushing? And she will say, no, I'm not pushing. And that's when she's ready to push. And her body is naturally doing it, and she needs to be upright, and she needs to feel it, and she needs to feel her power, and she needs to put her feet flat on the floor. It's like belly dancing. You need to stand your ground and push that baby out of your body. But if you are lying flat on your back in these leatherette things with the chains, I mean, who thought that up? We're going to chain you to these poles and not think of anything sexually perverted here, and get you to push this child out uphill. And, again, when women go back to that kind of experience, she will hear those voices in her head saying, you're not pushing hard enough, because here's the head and there it goes, and here it comes and there it goes. And nobody seems to be aware. Look, I'm trying to push this child uphill here. Just turn her over onto her hands and knees. But again, we have to consider those mothers who feel uncomfortable. They feel, it's a dog position. Where they talk about that sexually as well. The doggy position for sex. And so we have a negative association with that. But if she can be squatting to bring that head down, and as soon as she can feel that head with her hand, and if her midwife is encouraging her to put her hand there and feel that head, you push like this and you can feel that head coming into your own hand, then we can tell her we're going to put you on your hands and knees now, because if we lift that right leg and put her foot flat on the floor in that tripod position, then she still has her hand available to have on her baby's head. And she's crouching forward in a beautiful, effective, round position where the power is coming from the top and is rotating down and through her body, and her hand welcoming her baby. It's like the letter C, you know, how you curve like this and her hand is there. And she can feel if she's pushing effectively, she can feel that baby coming. We try and disassociate women from the process. I don't know why we do that. But if we can get her to imagine it in her pregnancy, what is it going to feel like when she is aware there's a pineapple sitting in her bum? You know, women, first of all, when you are aware of that, are going to pretend it's not happening. You're going to convince yourself, no, there is no pineapple there, and there's nothing going on here. But at some point, she's going to be aware that that pressure is growing and something is going on in my anal sphincter. And I think I might be going to have a poo on the floor. And what is everybody going to think about me if I'm going to squat here and poo on the floor? And again, so I tell my mums, put yourself in his shoes. You are the supporter. You have watched your most beloved partner become pregnant, go through all the nausea and the vomiting and the food aversions and the body dysmorphia of, oh, do I love myself still? Do I look sexy? How's my bum? Well, I'm feeling, and heading for a labor, and I've got to push this baby out of my body, and I don't know how I'm going to do that. And you're thinking, my goodness, he's taken this on so well, and he's so brave, and I'm so proud of him. And this is how we're going to work together. And then in the labor, 1 hour after another, and she's sweating and straining and puking and eat this and drink that, and then here he is on his hands and knees, and the midwife says to her, look in this mirror, look what you can see, look, there's your baby's head. She's going to lean over the midwife and think, oh, look at that, there's a head. She's not going to think, yeah, but there was poo on the floor. You don't think like that. He's not going to be thinking that. He's going to be thinking, oh, I can't believe I saw my baby's head. And then she pushed that baby out of her body. And here's that child. We really need to take people back to the miracle of birth and not make it this medical process of come in at this stage, do this, lie here, hospital gown, do the CTG, legs up, don't move, get your drugs, here's your epidural. No, you're not contracting effectively now because you've had an epidural and you're lying on your back and now nothing's working. So I'm going to give you this oxytocin, artificial, in the arm. Now I've got control of your contractions, and we can get you out of here really quickly, and we can get 3 people in this bed in this 24-hour period. So we're going to turn up the volume, but you've got the epidural, and so we can turn up the epidural as the pain breaks through, and you're turning up the epidural, we're turning up the oxytocin, and everything is rallying and competing against those 2 things, and the baby is sitting there in this abnormally dysfunctional position trying to get out, feeling all of these artificial contractions and the strength and the power of the force of this artificial oxytocin driving this child down against a wall, because where's it supposed to go? Into the bed. So, yes, of course, we're rushing off for doing things to women when nothing's working. As soon as we start to interfere, then yes, we can only expect more and more complications because we're interfering. But if we were to celebrate the power of normal, and if we were to educate women about what is normal, then they could look forward to labor, and they could look forward to producing oxytocin naturally, and they could look forward to their own endorphins. They're more powerful than any drug that we could give them. They've got the power within themselves to produce the pain relief if we just were to encourage them to do it, and to do it in harmony with their partners and their
Oh,
babies.
absolutely. Sharon, so talking about all of this demise, that your favorite position is squatting, that you get your mom to squat to birth if everything's
No,
going well.
no,
No. You like the
no,
all fours with
I
the
get her
leg
to be
up,
up.
the triangle.
I get her, yeah. So I get her first of all to look at her own music. She's got 4 playlists she's playing. She's playing her happy singing, dancing music. So she will rock and do the hokey cokey and bake her cake and swing her pants and have a lovely time at home. And then she's on her hands and knees in the back seat of the car coming into wherever she's going. And then she's up and down the stairs and she's running around the block and whatever she has to do to keep that pelvis rocking and rolling. And she's possibly in the shower and she's wherever she needs to be while we're filling the pool. And then she will be squatting as she approaches her second stage, because now we're getting that head to sit on that cervix comfortably and get rid of those elastic bands, if you like, that are spreading out like throwing a pebble into a pond, and all the ripples of the cervix moving out of the way of the baby's head. And then she can get into whatever position she likes. But it's natural for her to want to have her hand on her baby's head. This universe is powering through her body, and it's natural to put your hand there and see what on earth is going on. And if she wants to have an intact perineum, then on her hands and knees, the perineum is lifted. Look, where's my pelvis? Here. On her hands and knees, the perineum sits here. So this is the vagina coming down there. Here is her perineum, where my finger arch is. And on her hands and knees, it's lifted up out of the way. So the head is coming below it, here, like this. On her back, like this, the perineum is pulled tight across there. Look, where's the blooming camera? Here. Here is her coccyx there, and her perineum is pulled tight across the coccyx. And so, of course, she's going to power that head through it, and she's going to tear. So with the
And
perineum
Sharon,
lifted, naturally it's lifted up out of the way, and the head will come down. And so as her head, before she starts crowning that baby's head, we're playing with stop pushing, don't push, give me a little push. And I'm using aromatherapy, hot cloths, cuprum from a homeopathic point of view, and then just little, big push, little push, don't push at all. Let the power of the contraction push the baby for you. It's not like your body stops working. You're not needed to push unless that child has their hand on their head. And I've got a very lovely picture over there of Scarlett, who had both her hands. Like, you know how you see a toddler, when they're tired and they go to their ears, where you can tell when your child's tired because they're playing with their ear. And that comes from their birth, when they're distressed and the power behind them is shoving them down through like a toothpaste coming out of a tube. Then they hang on to their ears when they are getting worried or scared. And so here's Scarlett coming with both her hands on her ears. And her mum was a first-time mum, and we had to get her to stand like Captain Morgan and, whatever, put your foot in a bucket, squat like this, move like that, change from here. I get them to sit on their partner's lap, so their bums hanging down between his knees, and she's got a pashmina, he's got a pashmina. They're pulling each other towards each other. They've got eyeball to eyeball, and they're pushing together. So we can push like that, and then we get it to hold on to the pool and push like that. But every time she moves in order to change position, she's shaking up that pelvis and she's moving that child, and something will just dislocate or rock that baby into a better position, or a hand will move out of the way. We could use rebozo still at that point. And yes, as the head is coming, because she has more awareness of herself, of her baby, and of her power, she's not feeling that ring of fire. She doesn't have to feel the ring of fire. So whether if she's birthing in the water, of course, there's very little ring of fire then, because the water is keeping the perineum supple. And if she's on her hands and knees, then she just has to push into that burn, and the burn will go numb then. Hot cloths and aromatherapy is really nice then. And of course, she's got all those lovely smells of lavender and geranium, and the cuprum helps because that's like deep heat without the heat, and it just helps the perineum to stretch that little bit more. And either we're using it as an ointment or we're using it orally, and that just helps her to birth that baby slowly. If we know all the way through the labor, the fetal heart is fine, this is a healthy baby. And in the second stage, we're listening all the time between contractions. How's the baby? How's the baby? How's the baby? And if that baby is fine, then there is no hurry here. If we know the fetal heart is fine, then she can take her time. We can reassure a mum that your baby is fine. So push when you're ready, or get in touch with your power and follow your body's instinct. But if we have any concern about the baby, then of course we need her to step up to that plate and not to be afraid,
Oh,
and to
absolutely.
give it all she's got and push like a lunatic. And I'll tell her, push like a
And
lunatic.
Sharon,
Off she
and
goes.
so then in terms of possibly a more emergent situation, or a doctor who says that it's better to have something like an episiotomy so that they can be in control of the tear, that they're in charge of the tear, so to speak, rather than allowing a possible tear to happen naturally. What is your take on that? Because Lisa and I've seen all too often that especially in government, that sometimes episiotomies are just standard protocol to protect the midwife in case they say, oh no, this baby was deprived of oxygen because the midwife didn't cut an episiotomy, and the mom had to birth on her back, because then the midwife is in control, and the midwife cuts an episiotomy because so that she's in control, because that's hospital protocol, and she's covered if anything, and if that baby had to land up in ICU or was deprived of oxygen or needed to be resuscitated and that kind of thing. I've had moms, even private moms, whose gynaes have said it's that they recommend an episiotomy rather than an unguided tear.
I'm just itching
You've
to
got 10
answer
minutes,
all.
Sharon. Is that enough?
Okay, so if you consider an earthquake is going to follow the path of least resistance and is going to follow the earth in a jaggy way. And if you were to decide, okay, I don't want this earthquake here, this is going to be inconvenient, I'm going to move it over here, by half a kilometer over here. It wouldn't make any sense, because when the earth started to shake, the path of least resistance was going to tear anyway. And women need to learn to ask more questions, because if they are being told that I am going to do an episiotomy in order to direct a tear, to prevent you tearing further, she needs to ask, well, does that mean that I am not going to tear in addition to this episiotomy? Because how many times do you have an episiotomy and her body is torn in the other direction as well? Or the episiotomy has torn further down. So it just has caused that rip. You know, if you're going to cut material, you just need to cut that bit there, and then it's just so. If we are educating women, if they are healthy women, we're only ever talking about healthy women. We're not talking about women who are edematous and have puffy, swollen perineums. And we're not talking about women with their water retention and their high blood pressures and, you know, who are not well enough to push babies out. We're talking about healthy women who are elastic and young. We're not talking about, okay, as old dolly girls. You have babies when you're young because that's when you are elastic. And so if we are teaching them about perineal massage, women have done perineal massage for centuries. This is not a new thing. In Indian cultures, in the Ayurvedic ways of life, in so many different cultures in the world, women have taken care of each other's perineum. I mean, that's a bit kinky in the modern world, but you know, it has been done traditionally. One of the things the doula would have done. And in America, the obstetrician does it in labor, which I think is a bit weird as well. But if a woman is in charge and her partner is in charge of her perineum and its care, and part of his role in her life is her protection and protection from harm, protection physically from harm of whatever, and protection emotionally from harm, then they are working together in the pregnancy to make sure that she's going to be elastic. If that midwife is, again, guarding, not from, we were taught to guard the perineum. That means the mother's on her back and the perineum is exposed and you can't miss it. And then you've got to hang on to it, but then you're bruising it already. You know, it's just ridiculous, really. So we just turned her over, then, you know, you can see the perineum and it's all elastic and it's hanging in the right place and the head is coming and it's just so much more beautiful. And so, yes, if you have a tear, it's going to come apart like that. And when a woman sits after her birth or stands, her body comes back together like that and will heal with least trauma and with least surgical involvement, scar tissue. If we have a small tear, and again, for a very long time, we have used nori, which is seaweed. Small tears can heal most beautifully using nori as a dressing. If stitches are required, even when you've got a tear, then you have less scar tissue. But if you have an episiotomy, then you've got sides of a wound like this that come together and you've got a big ridge of scar tissue down the middle. And very often you've got a bit at the top, which, because you haven't pulled it together straight, because she's not sitting straight and her pelvis isn't straight after she's had a baby, and maybe she's got a towel underneath her or a pillow or something. And so you've got edges like this, and so you just cut off the top of that because it's uneven, and so many doctors want to add extra stitches because he's going to give him more pleasure. And so often then you've got permanent pain every single time you're going to have sex from that child's birthday, which means, again, so often she never wants to have sex again. He's been
Mm.
watching, standing over her shoulder, watching this head coming and going, coming and going. And it's such a trauma for him that, you know, his palace that he's had so much fun in is now destroyed. Or there is a man comes between him and his woman with a pair of scissors. I mean, you know, under what other circumstance would a man stand by and let another man take a pair of scissors? You know, when you interview men after a birth like that, they talk very often about the sound of the scissors going through the muscle. All they could remember of their child's birth was the sound of the scissors going through that vagina. How can he ever get revved up again and want to return to his palace of pleasure, and for her to feel glorious again and sexual, when they've experienced such a trauma? If you're on your hands and knees,
Oh.
he's down there at the face end, or if they're squatting together and she's on his lap, it's his face that she's looking at. It's her face that they're looking at. They're pushing together. He can slip a hand underneath her and feel that head and get all excited just as much as she is, without having to expose women in such a degrading, humiliating,
Mm.
dysfunctional way.
Sure. You know, Sharon, you've done it again. My ovaries are going, I just want a baby. I want to give birth. Oh, that was wonderful. I think, you know, we said we were going to talk about different positions, but I think we covered it without giving specifics because each woman is different and each birth is different. So what the woman feels like she wants to do is what we should go with the guidance of a midwife or doctor, of course. But, you know, she wants to have the healthiest birth. So
Yeah.
I think if we've given a woman anything today, she just listen to her body and go with that instinct of how you would
And
like
listen
to
to
birth.
her team too, because, you know, it can be extremely traumatic for a mum to have pushed two babies out successfully, and then the third child can't navigate at all and needs to be born via cesarean section. As long as, whenever we're having a cesarean section, it's for a very good reason, then
Mm,
we are welcoming healthy children and healthy mums into the world. And yeah, there is purpose to it.
And
absolutely.
just, I'd love to end off my 2 cents. You know, there's if you know, going back to how birth is portrayed in the media, if we really go all the way back to the first ever first ever library book, you know, into the Bible and hieroglyphics and Celtic statues, birth is never portrayed as women lying in bed flat on their backs. In the Bible, they talk about the birth stool, and in hieroglyphics, all the women, and also in Celtic artwork, all the women are
The legs
standing
are always
and squatting, and then you
squatting.
see the baby emerging. And my son asked me such a good question. He said, you know, Mom, what happens to women in the, you know, to tribes, women, tribal women in the jungle? He said, how what do they do in an emergency? How, like, you know, are there tons of babies dying and women dying? And I said to him, on the contrary, those women, when they start feeling those labor pains, they find a beautiful spot in in the forest, and they squat down and deliver their babies and birth their babies. They're not made to lie on their backs. They
But they don't
are
know they
very,
can.
and that they don't
They're
know.
listening to their bodies.
They
Yeah.
listen, so that amazing instinct that, that's how women's bodies were created, and just how much you can facilitate, an easier birth for you and your
Mm.
baby just by even just laboring in upright position. Even if you do, feel that you would like to lie on your back, if you've spent, a lot of your labor in that upright position, you're not going to be fighting this baby whose head is still sitting so high up. And so, yeah, so that's my takeaway. Look back at, how, like, going back before, the medical model of care started interfering with the episiotomies and
Read the
pain.
first couple of chapters of Immaculate Deception, because that's the first chapter. You just described that completely, of an African woman going out into the forest to dig a pit, in actual fact, to birth over that pit. But of course, yes, on the other hand, and you can hear all those naysayers in the background saying, yes, but of course, African women bleed to death, and African women, because I mean, even if you look at the Irish community, how if you're going to have a baby every year for 10 years, and yes, you're going to bleed, and women died in childbirth. But we've got all the wonder of modern science and the wisdom of ancient skills and the art of birth. And when we can marry
Exactly.
those two together and use the science to encourage a woman that her baby's not in distress and that she can follow her body, or that there's a problem here and we need to step away and use the technology, then we should be able
Like you
to,
say,
yeah, yeah,
merging
yeah, work
beautifully together, working hand in hand.
as, yes, as teams,
oh,
that a woman needs to trust her team, and the team needs to encourage that mother to feel that instinct of her body.
I love it. I love it. Ladies, again, we've just spoken. It feels like 5 minutes and we've already covered an hour. I just love listening to you, Sharon, and I thank you so much for all your knowledge. It's just such a blessing.
Thank you
And
too.
we will see you next time. Have a lovely
Mm,
evening.
Thank you,
you too.
everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.